Picture a government that fits on 40 carts, not a palace, not a capital city. A convoy, beds, chapels, coin chests, hunting hawks, the Great Seal of England, creaking down a mud road in the dark, because the king woke before dawn and decided without telling anyone that today the kingdom would be somewhere else. Add a queen who keeps her own rival court 4 days' ride to the south, with her own poets and her own plans. Add 4 sons who will each, in their turn, take up arms against their father, and a 5th child of a kind, a dead archbishop whose blood, 2 winters old, still hasn't dried on the floor of Canterbury Cathedral. At least not in anyone's mind. That's the court of Henry II, King of England, Duke of Normandy, Count of Anjou, Lord of lands running from the Scottish border to the mountains of Spain in the year 1172. The most powerful family in Christendom, the richest household in Europe, and the most dangerous place in the world to be a servant with sharp ears, a place where you could carry a king's feather bed at dawn and watch a kingdom catch fire by supper. We're going back there tonight, not as barons, not as bishops, not as tourists craning at crowns. We're going in with the baggage, one boy, one household, one family tearing itself apart in front of the people who fold its shirts. Everything he would have seen, smelled, heard and survived. One honest word before we start, because this channel keeps its promises. The castles in this story are real, and you can walk their walls today. The dates are real. The letters I'll quote were really written, and every quarrel, flight, battle and penance of the king's family happened the way the chroniclers set it down. I'll tell you their names as we go, but the boy whose eyes you're about to borrow is stitched together from the hundreds of wardrobe boys, cart lads and hall servants who really did pack those carts and never got their names written into any roll. The rooms are true, the eyes are lent. Where the record ends and the reconstruction begins, I will always tell you which is which. So, I make these history stories, and honestly I've given up trying to work out whether anyone actually sleeps to them, or whether you're all just weirdos who like lying in the dark listening to a 16-year-old count pack horses in freezing rain, while the most famous family in Europe screams itself to pieces 2 tents away. Either way, subscribe if you want. Get comfortable. Here we go. The horn goes through you before you're awake enough to know it's a horn. One long note rising at the end from somewhere near the gatehouse, then a second. By the third, you're already sitting up in the dark with straw in your hair and your art slamming, because your body learned this lesson months before your mind did. That call means departure. Departure means the king is leaving, and the king leaving means that everything has to be on the road behind him before he notices it isn't. For half a second you can't remember which building you're in, which county, which country. That's not laziness, that's the job. Then the smells sort you out the way they always do, cold hearth ash and damp thatch close by. Horse dung and wet leather from the yard below, because you're sleeping over a stable, which is what passing for luck looks like at your level. Tallow smoke from somewhere. Someone's already lit a rushlight. And underneath it all, the deep, tired stink of wool that has been rained on and dried on a living body too many times, which is to say, you. Welcome to the itinerant court of Henry II, King of England. It is October in the year 1172. You're in a royal manor in the marches of Normandy, whose name you learned 2 days ago and will forget within the week, and the horn is still sounding. Beside you, Perrin groans into the straw. Perrin is a Norman boy, 15, with a crooked front tooth and an unshakable belief that he will someday be a falconer. He is your bedmate, your workmate, and the closest thing you have to a brother. Yes, you share a straw bed over a stable. That's normal. Every boy in the wardrobe train does. Privacy is a luxury that exists somewhere above the level of knights, and even they sleep three to a chamber. It's the middle of the night, Perrin says, with his eyes still shut. It's an hour to dawn. That's the middle of the night. He's not wrong, but the horn doesn't care, and neither does Ansel, whose boots you can already hear on the ladder. Your name is Wat. You're 16 years old, born on a manor near Andover in the county of Hampshire, third son of a ploughman, which is to say, born to nothing and pointed nowhere. A cousin of your mother's carries bread in the king's pantry, and 18 months ago, when the household was passing through Hampshire, eating its way across the county the way it eats its way across every county, that cousin got you taken on as a boy of the wardrobe train. You arrived with a spare shirt, a horn-handled knife, and your mother's blessing. Back home, everyone said the king's service would either make you or swallow you whole. They weren't wrong either way. The wardrobe. Let me tell you what that word means, because it doesn't mean a cupboard. The wardrobe is the department of the king's household that keeps everything the king owns that isn't food or weapons. His robes and furs, his bed and its hangings, his plate, his spare saddles, his candle stores, and riding in iron-bound chests that 2 men can barely lift. A great deal of his silver. When the court moves, the wardrobe moves, on carts and on the backs of sumpter horses, and boys like you and Perrin are the hands that lift it, rope it, walk beside it, and answer for it. And the court always moves. The ladder creaks, and Ansel's head comes up through the hatch, lit from below by the rushlight in his fist. Ansel is the under-marshal who commands the wardrobe carts, a thick, weathered man of maybe 45 with a beard going grey in streaks, and hands so scarred by rope that the palms look like carved wood. Those hands can tell a rotten girth strap in the dark just by the sound it makes when he flexes it. "Up," he says. The king rides at first light. Rides at... The king said we'd stay 3 days, Perrin says. The king said... The king, says Ansel, has changed the king's mind. Up. You're already pulling on your hose because you knew that answer before Perrin finished the question. You've learned the first law of this household, the law under all the other laws. The court moves, not when it's convenient, not when it's announced. It moves when the restless man at the centre of it moves, and your whole life is the space between his decision and his departure. You splash your face with water from the bucket by the hatch, 2 days old, tasting faintly of the oak it sits in. Drag on your shoes and go down the ladder into the dark with your teeth still gritted against the cold. The yard is chaos, rushlights and torches everywhere, throwing shadows the size of giants against the manor walls. Grooms hauling horses out of the stable by their halters, the horses stamping and blowing smoke in the cold. Carters backing oxen into their yokes with curses that would get them fined a day's wage if the chaplain were close enough to hear. The kitchen boys are flinging kettles and spits into their wagon with a clangour like a battle. Somewhere in the middle of it, a clerk of the chapel is standing with a candle, wailing that the vestment chest has been loaded onto the wrong cart, and nobody is stopping to help him. And here is the thing you must understand, the thing that took you months to believe. This is not a disaster. This is ordinary. This is simply what it is like every time, and it was famous even then. There is a churchman in this household, a clerk called Peter of Blois, a small, sharp-tongued man who writes letters the way other men drink, constantly and with relish. In one of those letters, a real letter that you can still read 8.5 centuries later. He described exactly what you're living through this morning. If the king has promised to spend the whole day somewhere, Peter wrote, you may be certain he will be off at dawn, upsetting everyone's plans, and you will see men running about as if they were mad, beating their pack horses, driving their carts into one another. A perfect portrait, he said, of hell. And if the king announces an early start, you may be equally certain he will sleep until noon, while the loaded horses stand drooping, and the carters doze, and everyone frets about the daylight burning away. That's not me inventing colour. That's a man who was there, complaining in ink that still survives. This morning it's the first kind, the mad kind. What? Ansel's voice cuts through the yard. Count. And this is your particular job, the thing that makes you slightly more than a pair of arms. From your belt you pull a hazel stick as long as your forearm, smoothed by your own hands, carrying a ladder of notches down one face. One notch for every cart and every sumpter load in the wardrobe train. 19 loads this season, 7 carts, 12 pack horses. You cut the notches yourself under Ansel's eye, and every time the court moves, every single time, in darkness, in rain, in the middle of a meal, you walk the line and lay your thumb on each notch as its load passes, because a chest of the king's silver that falls behind on a Norman road does not stay on that road for long. Ansel gave you the stick in the spring after the boy who kept it before you were sent home with a crushed foot. He put it in your hand and said the words you've heard him say 100 times since, the closest thing the baggage train has to a creed. Pack fast, tie twice, say nothing. You asked him that first day what the saying nothing part was for. He looked at you the way a mason looks at a stone he isn't sure of yet. You'll ride within earshot of the great ones, he said. Kings, queens, the young lords. They quarrel like any family, and they'll quarrel in front of you, because to them you're a cartwheel with legs. The moment you repeat what you hear, boy, you stop being a wheel and start being a witness. Nobody in this world kills a wheel. You didn't fully understand him then. You will. By the time the sky has gone from black to iron grey, the train is formed up in the road, and you've walked the line twice, thumb on every notch, 19, all present. Your breath smokes. Your fingers are already split at the knuckles from the cold and the rope. They split in October and don't properly heal until May. That's simply the shape of the year. And the day's bread ration is a fist-sized loaf of yesterday's baking that you eat standing up walking, because boys of the wardrobe do not sit to eat. You will not sit down again, except on a cart tail, until dark. At the head of the column, too far away to be more than a shape among torches, a compact, heavy-shouldered man in a plain riding cloak swings up onto a horse without touching the stirrup, and the whole river of people and animals and wealth lurches into motion behind him. That's him. That's the king. And you know, because you have done this march before, exactly what the day ahead of you looks like. 20 miles of mud, or 25, or 30 if the mood is on him, at a pace that kills horses. You do not yet know. Nobody in this column knows, not the clerks, not the barons, not the queen far away in the south, perhaps not even the restless man at the front, that the road you are all on ends in a war. Not a war against France, though France will be in it, and not a war against Scotland, though Scotland will bleed for it. A war inside one family, father against sons, husband against wife. The chroniclers will spend the rest of their lives trying to explain it. You're just trying to keep up with the carts. Keep walking. We have a long way to go tonight, and it's all downhill into sleep from here. The march is where you learn the household, because the march is where the household shows its bones. Up at the front, beyond your sight most of the day, ride the king and his intimates, the earls and barons in attendance, the officers of state, the clerks of the chancery with the great seal of England riding in its own locked box. The chapel travels behind them. Priests, portable altar, vestments and the relics. Then the chamber, which is the king's private world of bed and basin and candlelight. Then the kitchen, the pantry, the butlery with its wine carts, the marshalsea with its spare horses. Then you, the wardrobe train, 19 loads of everything a king owns. And behind you, straggling for a mile down the road, comes what the clerks call, with a curled lip, the tail of the court, the huntsmen with the hound packs, the falconers with hooded birds swaying on their frames, the washerwomen, the peddlers, the dice players, the women who are politely called laundresses and are not laundresses, and every kind of hanger-on that a moving mountain of money attracts. Peter of Blois wrote about them too, the actors and gamesters and confectioners and parasites trailing the court like gulls behind a fishing boat. He was sour about it. He was also, you notice, still here. The horns run the whole animal. That's the second thing Ansel drilled into you. Your first week, standing in a yard with his hands cupped around your ear. 3 calls, he said, and your life depends on telling them apart. A long note rising at the end, blown twice or 3 times. Departure. The court moves, get the loads up. Short notes in a broken stutter, like a man coughing. Alarm. Wolves. Thieves. Fire. Close the train and arm the carters. And one single note, long and flat and held until the hornblower's breath dies. The king rides now, not the household, just him, gone with a handful of riders at a speed no baggage can follow, and God help the plans of everyone left behind. You'll hear that last one more than you'd think, Ansel said, and one day you'll hear a horn at an hour when no horn should sound. When that happens, don't ask questions. Count your loads and watch me. You've remembered that. File it away. You'll need it before this story is done. The pace this morning is brutal, because it always is. This king does not amble. Men in the household swear he can cover in a day what other lords cover in 3 or 4, and you believe it, because you've watched him do it downhill from behind, choking on the dust of it. There's a story the clerks tell, from the days when the old archbishop was alive and the 2 of them were friends, that the king once moved between Normandy and England, sea passage included, faster than his own letters announcing him. The chroniclers loved him and hated him for the same quality. He is never ever still. You see him properly at the noon halt, and seeing him is always a small shock, because he looks like nothing. Understand what I mean by that. And when I say he looks like nothing, I need you to understand what that means at a 12th century court, where every man's rank is stitched onto his body in fur and colour. The King of England is a barrel-chested man of 39 with a thick neck, cropped reddish hair going grey, and legs visibly bowed from a life spent on horseback. His hands are rough and chapped because he refuses gloves except for hawking. His cloak is good wool and nothing more. There are counting-house clerks in Rouen dressed finer. The men who wrote about him, and many did because he fascinated everyone who met him, set down all of it. The grey eyes that go bloodshot when the temper rises, the voice cracked from shouting on hunts, the restlessness that keeps him on his feet from morning till night, so that the whole court must stand aching through the days, because no one may sit while the king stands. He hears mass standing, does business standing, eats little, sits still for nothing, and wears out everyone around him. Peter of Blois wrote that the king's court was a torment because of it. and then followed him for years anyway. That's the man at the centre of your world. You have never spoken to him. If fortune is kind, you never will. Boys of the wardrobe are not spoken to by kings. They are the reason the king's second-best cloak is dry when he wants it, and that is all they are. But you watch him. Everyone watches him. Watching him is the great occupation of this household, the way sailors watch the sky. Because the king's mood is the weather here. That's the phrase you learned your first month from Gilbert of the Kitchen, and it's the truest thing anyone has told you. The king's anger is weather. When it's fair, the whole column jokes and sings. When the wind turns, grown knights go quiet. Clerks find reasons to ride at the rear, and a boy who drops a chest is wise to be invisible. His rages are famous. The whole world has heard how, 2 winters ago, a handful of words flung out in one of them sent 4 knights across the sea to Canterbury with swords. We'll come to that. Everything in this story comes to that. The noon halt is no meal to speak of. Bread again, cheese if the pantry cousin remembers you, and wine so bad it has its own place in history. I mean that literally. Peter of Blois, in that same letter, described the court's wine as thick and greasy and flat, and wrote that he had seen great men served wine so full of dregs that they had to filter it through their teeth with their eyes shut. The bread, he said, was made from whatever came to hand, unleavened, half-baked, heavy as lead. You eat it anyway. You're 16, and you've walked 12 miles since dark. You would eat the lead itself. It's at the noon halts that you get your teaching, such as it is, and your teacher is mostly old Ralph. Ralph is the senior drover of the wardrobe train, a bent brown man somewhere past 60. He doesn't know his own age, and gets angry if you press him, who's been walking beside royal baggage since the old king's day, before this king, for the civil war that everyone over 40 still measures their lives by. He has outlived 2 wives, 1 shipwreck, and he claims 3 separate horses that tried personally to kill him. His hands shake in the morning until he's worked them warm, and his knees sound like green wood splitting. But no man in the train can load a sumpter horse to balance the way Ralph can, and everyone knows it. Today, while the oxen stand steaming, he teaches you girths. Look here. He pulls you down beside a pack saddle, turns the girth strap over in his shaking fingers, and shows you a place where the leather has gone pale and dry. Feel that. Go on. Feel it. You feel it. The leather there is stiff, faintly cracked, like the skin of your own knuckles. That strap will carry weight all day today, all day tomorrow, maybe a month. Then one day, on a hill, in the rain, it parts, and a chest of the king's plate goes down a slope into a river, and some boy hangs for a thief because the count comes up short. Leather doesn't break, boy. Leather announces, weeks ahead, if you listen with your fingers. Then he shows you the remedy, and makes you do it until your fingertips are raw. How to cut a lace of rawhide, how to pierce the strap either side of the weakness, how to bind and backweave the splice so that it tightens on itself under load instead of slipping. A proper splice, Ralph says, is stronger than the strap around it. Learn it in the sun, he says, so your hands know it in the dark. Everything on this road you'll ever have to do that matters, you'll have to do in the dark, in the wet, with someone screaming at you. That's not bad luck. That's just the terms of service. Remember the splice. Like the horn calls, it's going with us to the end of this story. You walk on through the afternoon. This is the part no chronicle bothers to describe, so let me describe it, because it was most of these people's lives, the road itself. Norman roads in autumn are troughs of mud between hedge banks, churned by every column that passes, and the court is the biggest column there is. You walk beside your assigned cart with a hand on the ropework, feeling the lashings the way Ralph feels leather. You put your shoulder to the wheel, not as a figure of speech, as a fact, 10 or 12 times a day, when the mud sucks it down. The cold water comes over the top of your shoes by mid-morning, and your feet simply live in it. By evening you can't feel them, and the first hour by the fire as they come back is a special quiet misery every walker in the train knows and no one mentions. The sounds a rope creak, wheel groan, ox breath, the tick and slap of harness, the drover's low, constant cursing like a kind of prayer. And over it, at intervals, from somewhere far ahead, the horns. And here's what you must not miss, because it's the whole strangeness of your life. That groaning, mud-caked, foul-mouthed column is a government. In the locked boxes of the chancery carts rides the Great Seal, and clerks who at every halt unpack folding desks and write writs, charters, letters to sheriffs and popes and kings, with numb fingers, on their knees in the lee of a wagon. Cases are judged at those halts, fortunes granted, men's lives disposed of. England is ruled at the speed of your oxen, from wherever tonight's fire happens to burn. Other kings sit in their capitals like spiders in webs. This king is a hawk that never lands, and the striking thing, the thing even his enemies grant, is that it works. His writ runs from the Scottish border to the Pyrenees, over more of France than the King of France himself can call his own. And it runs because the king in person, with his seal and his temper and his baggage train, may come down any road in any weather and see for himself. Fastest court in Christendom, Ralph says, watching you rub your feet at the evening fire, and the hungriest and the worst slept. You know what the clerks call it? They call it the School of Patience. A man learns more patience here in a year, they say, than a monk learns in a cloister in 10. He spits comfortably into the fire. They also learn to steal firewood. Watch your wood, boy. That night the court doesn't reach the lodging that was intended because it never does. The king turned aside 8 miles back to look at a castle's works, and so the whole column has fetched up at a manor meant to feed 40 men, carrying 400. This too Peter of Blois wrote down, and you can hear the shudder in his Latin, how the court would wander at dusk into places no honest man would pitch a tent, and how courtiers drew swords over hovels a pig would have turned up its nose at. Tonight you see a knight, a belted knight, a man with land, stand in the mud and bid silver against another knight for the right to sleep in a granary. You and Perrin sleep where the wardrobe boys always sleep. Under a cart, rolled in sacking, back to back for warmth like 2 spoons in a drawer. Above you, through the boards, you can hear rain beginning. Somewhere off in the dark, the unlucky half of the household is still arguing over roofs. What, Perrin says, half asleep. When I'm falconer, I'll have a bed, a real one, with a curtain. You'll be dead of wet lungs by spring is what you'll be. A curtain, what? His voice is already furring over into sleep. You can come look at it. The rain thickens. The oxen shift and sigh. Your feet are burning their way back to life, and your split knuckles sting where the rope kissed them, and you are, by any measure your mother would recognise, wretched, wet, walked half to death, propertyless, invisible. And yet, under this cart is the King of England's second bed. In that chest, a foot from your head, are candlesticks worth more than your father's village. You're inside the walls of the greatest household in the world, and tomorrow it will need you again, and that, as sleep takes you with the rain drumming 6 inches above your face, that is not nothing. Pack fast. Tie twice. Say nothing. You belong to the baggage, and the baggage belongs to the king. Now let me give you the family, because you cannot understand the next 2 years of your life without them, and neither could anyone else in Europe. This is the part where every word is on the record. I'm not inventing any of it. Nobody would dare invent this family. Begin with the marriage, because everything begins with the marriage. 20 years ago, in May of 1152, Henry, then a 19-year-old duke with enormous prospects and mud on his boots, married Eleanor, Duchess of Aquitaine in her own right, 11 years his senior, 8 weeks divorced from the King of France. The chroniclers barely knew how to write it down. She had been Queen of France. She had ridden on crusade to the Holy Land. She held, in her own person, the whole southwest of France, from Poitou down through Gascony, the richest wine lands in the world. When she married Henry, and when Henry then took England's crown 2 years later, the two of them together enclosed the French king's little royal lands like a hand closing around a coin. Men would spend a century fighting over the consequences. They had 8 children, and 7 lived, and of those 4 were sons who survive as this story begins, and you know them in the way a stable boy knows thunderheads. Henry, the eldest surviving son, 17 years old, and the household calls him the young king. And here you must slow down, because his title is the strangest thing in Europe, and it is the fuse under everything that follows. 2 years ago, in June of 1170 at Westminster, the old king had this boy crowned King of England, not heir, not prince, crowned, anointed, a second king while the first still reigned. The French do it. The Capetian kings crown their heirs in their fathers' lifetimes, and the old king wanted the succession nailed shut. So England now has 2 anointed kings, father and son, and the son has, count it with me, no kingdom, no province, no castle of his own, no treasury, and an allowance his father sets and his father can stop. There is a story from the coronation feast that the whole household repeats, because everyone who was there repeated it. The old king, in a gesture of holiday humility, carried the dish to his son's table with his own hands, and someone remarked what an honour it was to be served by a king. And the boy, in front of the hall, answered that it was no great thing for the son of a count to wait on the son of a king. The story ran everywhere. Men laughed when they told it. Then they stopped laughing partway through every time, because think about what that joke says about how the son prices his father. You've seen the young king close, closer than you've ever seen his father, because last year his household and the old king's travelled together for a season. He is, and every chronicler agrees on this, the most beautiful young man anyone has seen. Tall where his father is thick, golden, open-handed, easy, adored. Knights ruin themselves to follow him. He keeps the finest tournament household in Europe, with a young Norman knight called William Marshal at the head of it, teaching him arms. Mark that name, William Marshal. The age will not stop hearing about him. And the young king spends, God in heaven how he spends, horses, silks, feasts for 100 nights at a time. His debts are a running joke in the wardrobe accounts, and the joke lands on his father's table, and his father pays, and then refuses him, again and always, the one thing he actually asks for, something to rule. England, Normandy, Anjou, any of them. The answer is always no, not yet. Not while I live, or at least not now. A crowned king kept on pocket money. Even Ansel, who says nothing about the great ones on principle, said something once, watching the young king's glittering train ride past the baggage. They've built a war horse and stabled it in a hen coop. Then he looked at you, remembered his own creed, and cuffed you lightly round the head for listening. Richard is 15, the second son, and he belongs to his mother. That is not a manner of speaking. Eleanor has designated him heir to her own Aquitaine, and in June of this very year, 1172, you heard it from the heralds, he was formally installed at Poitiers as Count of Poitou in the Abbey Church of Saint-Hilaire, 15 years old, with lands of his own richer than most kings, which is precisely what his elder brother, the crowned king, has not got. You have seen Richard twice, at distance, a tall reddish gold boy who watches everything like a man pricing it. The men who wrote of him later said that even young he had a way of going quiet before he went hard. The South is already learning it. Geoffrey is 14, sharp-faced, quick and clever. Too clever, the clerks mutter, in the way they only mutter about the ones who frighten them. He is pledged to Brittany, betrothed to the little Duchess Constance, with the duchy held meanwhile by his father's hand. A chronicler who knew him grown would call him a son of perdition, a man of honeyed and persuasive speech who could talk two stones into fighting each other. At 14, what you notice from the baggage line is simpler. Of all the brothers, he is the one who listens most and says least. And John. John is 5, going on 6. Born at Christmas in 1166, the last child, the afterthought. He's at Fontevraud Abbey with the nuns for his raising, and he holds nothing at all, and the old king's name for him has already stuck all over the household, John Lackland. The king says it fondly, remember it anyway. Within the year, the old king's attempt to unlack John's land will help set fire to everything. And then there is the Queen. Eleanor is not with the court. Understand how strange that is, and then understand that no one at court finds it strange any more. For 4 years now, since 1168, the Queen has kept her own court at Poitiers, in her own city, in her own duchy, hundreds of miles from her husband. Officially, she governs Aquitaine in his name and rears Richard to rule it. Actually, and even the Carters know this much, the marriage has curdled. The king keeps mistresses. There is one, Rosamond Clifford, whose name is spoken at court the way you'd handle a hot dish. The Queen, at 50, rules a court of her own in the south, full of poets and young lords and her own grown children, and men who've been there come back talking like men who've seen a foreign country. What was actually said and planned in Poitiers in these years? No chronicle records from the inside. I'll be honest with you, storytellers have painted courts of love and councils of rebellion onto those walls for 800 years, and the truth is we hold only the edges. But this much is documented, and it is enough. The Queen sits apart, with her own money, her own vassals, her own heir at her knee, and a grievance. You saw her once at the great Christmas court 2 years back, before your service properly began. A straight-back figure in green silk very far away down a hall, perfectly still in a household that never stops moving, like something carved, like something waiting. That's the family. King, queen, 4 sons, and among them they hold or claim or want everything from Scotland to Spain. Men repeat a saying about this line of Anjou. Old, worn smooth, attributed to a saint. From the devil they came, and to the devil they will return. Courtiers say it with a little laugh. The laugh never quite reaches their eyes, and over all of it, over the king at his dinner, over the whole household like a stain in the air, lies Canterbury. You were not there. Thank God and every saint, no one you know was there. but you've heard it told so many times by clerks and carters and pilgrims that it plays behind your eyes as if you had been the 29th of December in the year 1170. 4 of the king's own knights in the archbishop's own cathedral, in the half-dark of a winter afternoon, vespers already begun. Thomas Becket, the king's chancellor once, his companion, the risen merchant's son the king had made archbishop with his own insistence, and then fought with for 7 poisonous years, cut down on the flagstones by the little door from the cloister, his crown of scalp shorn off by the sword stroke, his brains scattered on the pavement by a man who put a foot on his neck to do it. Monks scooped the blood into basins. Within days the sick were dipping cloths in it and calling themselves cured. Within months the Pope's legates were circling. The king swore on relics that he had never ordered it, that his hot words had been taken up by 4 literal-minded murderers, and most of the chroniclers, note it fairly, believed him about the order and blamed him for the words. He shut himself away when the news came, they say, and would not eat for days. Last year at Avranches he did public penance before the legates, and was reconciled to the church. Reconciled, that's the official word. But you have watched this king across 2 years of camps and halls, and you will tell anyone this much. The dead archbishop travels with the court. He is there in the way the king's face closes when Canterbury is named in dispatches. He is there in the arms that have swollen year on year, in the lepers fed at every halt. And out in the country something is happening that no king can command either way. The tomb in the cathedral crypt has become the busiest shrine in northern Europe. The miracle lists growing by the month, and word runs through the household, spoken quietly, watched for its effect, that Rome itself is examining the miracles, and that within the year the Pope will declare Thomas a saint. The household gossip will prove exactly right. In February of 1173 the Pope canonizes him, not 3 years dead, and the man the king broke will be wearing a halo, and every road in England is already filling with pilgrims going to kneel where the blood fell. Gilbert of the Kitchen, a wide, red-faced Englishman who has fed this court for 20 years and fears nobody, because armies may march on their stomachs, but kings positively crawl on them, put it to you flatly one evening, handing you a bone with more meat on it than your rank deserves. The king can outride any man alive, he said. I've watched him do it since he was your age. But you can't outride a dead man, boy. The dead keep up. The dead are always exactly 1 horse length behind you, sitting easy, fresh as morning. He wiped his hands. Eat that before someone asks why you have it. 2 years, that phrase has stayed with you. The dead keep up. You do not yet know it, but in the summer of 1174, on your knees on a stone floor with the smell of hot wax and blood in your throat, going to watch the most powerful man in Europe agree with Gilbert of the Kitchen. Winter is coming on now, and the horns keep sounding, and the whole enormous animal of the court is turning south. South out of Normandy, south through Maine, south to the valley of the Loire, and the great fortress on its cliff. The word runs down the column from the clerks to the cooks to you. The Christmas court this year of 1172 will be held at Chinon. The family, the whole terrible, glittering family, is gathering under one roof. You will be under it with them, carrying the candles. Sleep on that thought a while. The road runs on ahead of us, and it's about to get very grand, and then very dark. You smell Chinon before you see it, the way you smell every town. Wood smoke and river damp and tanneries. But Chinon you also hear hammers. The old king never stops building here. And then the column comes round a shoulder of hill above the Vienne, and Perrin, who has seen it before, still whistles through his crooked tooth. The castle rides its white cliff above the river like a ship on a wave. Not one castle, really. A whole ridge armoured in stone, walls running along the spur for a quarter of a mile, tower after tower, with the town of Chinon tucked below it between the rock and the water, and the Vienne sliding past green and slow, filled with barges bringing up wine and stone and salt. This is the heart castle of the Counts of Anjou. The old king's own line, his grandfather's grandfathers held this rock, and he has poured money into it his whole reign. The treasury of his continental land sits here behind 3 gates, and men say more of his silver sleeps at Chinon than anywhere else he owns. You believe it, because you have helped carry some of it, and you know which cart it rides in, and exactly how much your shoulders hate the chest. For 11 days before Christmas, your life is lifting. The wardrobe unpacks into a proper undercroft, a cool stone vault that smells of dust and cedar oil. And out of the chests come things you only see at the great feasts of the year. The hangings for the hall, embroidered with leopards, the king's great state robes, grey fur and scarlet, so heavy across your arms that you stagger, silver basins nested like clamshells, candlesticks as tall as Perrin. Everything must be shaken, brushed, aired, mended, counted. Your tally stick gets a second face of notches for the feast plate alone. Counting is how you finally understand what a Christmas court is, because a Christmas court is arithmetic before it is anything else. Listen to the sums you overhear the clerks groaning over, and understand your world through them. The household at festivals swells past 1,000 mouths. The provisioning rolls call for hundreds of hens and capons, whole herds of pigs and oxen driven in on their own feet, eels from the river by the 1,000, lampreys, the king's own favourite, bought singly at prices that would keep your family for a week. Wine comes up the Vienne in tons, great barrels each holding enough to fill a village trough, and the butlery reckons them in dozens. A single one of those tons costs more than a ploughman sees in 2 years. You earn a penny a day, and your food, when the clerk of the wages is prompt, which he is not. You do this counting in your head all Advent, standing in the undercroft with your stick, the candle allowance alone for the 12 days, wax not tallow for the hall and chapel, burns through more money than your entire village pays the Lord in a year. Nobody around you finds this remarkable. That's what a crown is, Ansel says, the right to burn money and call it light. It's at Chinon, that Advent, that you properly meet the 2 people who will matter most to you after Ansel, and I want you to mark them both. The first is Mabel. She rules the linen, a Kentish widow of 50-odd, wide as a church door, with forearms that could bend iron and a needle so fine you can barely see it move. She sews for the wardrobe, sheets, shirts, the endless mending of a household that lives in the rain. Her son, her only living child, is a man-at-arms in a garrison back in England, in the North Country, and when she speaks of him she touches the little cross at her neck without knowing she does it. Mabel feeds you scraps of threadwork and gossip in equal measure, and she is the one who catches you. One grey afternoon, staring at a bolt of scarlet cloth as it goes past, true scarlet, the famous dyed wool that lords pay for by weight like spice. She looks at you, goes into her basket and puts into your hands an offcut the size of 2 palms, a remnant of the king's own robe cloth, clipped in the cutting, hers by the perquisite of her office, and freely given. "There," she says. "So you know what it feels like, and stop gawping at it. It is softer than anything you've ever touched, and the red goes down into it like a colour seen in a dream, and it is worth more than everything else you own together. You fold it small and stitch it inside the breast of your tunic yourself, with thread Mabel lends you, and a lecture on your stitching thrown in free. Keep track of that scrap of scarlet. It has 3 more appearances in this story, and the last one will put a lump in your throat. The second is Simon, the youngest clerk of the king's chapel, a pale, earnest man of 22 who sings like a reed and worries like a hen. The chapel travels with a locked casket, a small iron-bound box that holds the king's travelling relics, and at Chinon the Advent Simon is given charge of it, and immediately begins losing sleep. He needs a pair of trustworthy hands to help him carry, fetch, and watch when the chapel sets up and strikes down, and Ansel, asked to lend a boy who can keep both his feet and his mouth shut, hands him you. So you become, on top of everything else, the boy who walks behind the casket. You never see inside it. You know only what Simon tells you, in a whisper, as if the box could hear. Relics of the saints travel in there, and the king, this shrewd, savage, unsentimental king, will not sleep a night on the road without them under his roof. File that away too. There is a night coming, on the sea, when that casket will be the centre of the world. And then it is Christmas, and the family gathers, and you see them all under one roof for the first and last time in your life. The record says what the record says, so let me say it plainly first. The chronicles set the old king and queen's Christmas court of 1172 at Chinon, with their sons about them, and they record no quarrel there. The explosion comes 6 weeks later at another court further south. What a boy carrying candles would remember is the kind of thing chronicles never stoop to. So here I lend you his eyes and tell you honestly that it is reconstruction, built from how these courts worked and what that family was. They're whole blazes. You counted the candles in. You know precisely what glory costs by the pound of wax. The leopard hangings you brushed for 3 days breathe in the draught like living hides. At the high table, the old king in the scarlet you carried sitting still for once, which somehow makes him more alarming, not less. The queen beside him, in from Poitiers with her own travelling household, straight-backed, gracious, unreadable, husband and wife who rule from opposite ends of an empire, wearing their marriage tonight like state robes, for show and for warmth both, and who can say in what shares. The young king, golden and loud, outshining his own crown, his knights roaring at his jokes. Richard beside his mother, the two of them tilting together when they speak, a court within the court. Geoffrey watching everyone. And a small boy, John, allowed up from his lessons for the feast, falling asleep against a cushion before the 3rd course, while above his head his family divides the world. You're against the wall with a ewer, refilling wine, invisible. And because you are invisible, you catch what servants catch, not words. The hall is a sea of noise, but weather. You see the young king's smile stiffen, twice, when his father's voice cuts across his own. You see the king lay his hand flat on the board while he talks at his eldest son, not angry, worse than angry, explaining. You see the queen watch her husband over the rim of her cup with a look you have no word for at 16, and will not find a word for until you are old. The look of someone reading a letter they wrote themselves, long ago, to a man who never answered it. You see Richard notice everything his mother notices, half a heartbeat behind her, like an echo learning. Nothing happens. That's what you'd swear to if anyone asked you. A great feast, and nothing happened. It will take you the rest of the winter to learn that in this family nothing happening is the loudest sound there is. On the feast of St. Stephen, with the court sleeping off the goose, old Ralph finds you and jerks his chin toward the stairs. Come up, bring your breath. You climb with him, slowly, for his knees, up through the towers to the high walk on the western wall, and there Chinon does the thing that great heights do, that this channel does love, and I make no apology. It lays the world out flat for you like a page. Below, the roofs of the town smoking with 1,000 dinners, the Vienne, grey silk in the winter light, barges dotted on it small as woodlice, the river plain running north and east, field strips and vineyards stitched together to the horizon, every seam of it owned, worked, taxed, tithed. Ralph points with his shaking hand. That way, days beyond seeing, Poitiers and the Queen's south. That way, Anjou and Maine, and then Normandy, weeks of your own footsteps. And beyond that, the cold sea and England. Everything you can see and 10 kingdoms worth you can't. One family's holding, the family currently digesting its dinner beneath your feet. I stood on this wall with the old Count's men before you were born, Ralph says. I'll say to you what a man said to me then, and mind it better than I did. He doesn't look at you, he looks at the river. To them down there, you're not even a cog in the mill. You're a splinter on the cog, but the mill grinds the finest flour in the world, boy, and you're inside it. And the wall between you and every splinter that never got inside is the width of your 2 hands' worth of work a day. He works his stiff fingers open and closed, wincing. It's not justice. Nobody promised you justice. But it's a place, and winter's outside it. Hold your place. Then he spits over the King of England's wall with tremendous unhurried dignity and starts back down the stairs. Hold your place. You will hear those words in your head many times in the 2 years coming, because the mill is about to shake itself half to pieces and splinters fly first. The court breaks up with January. The Queen goes back toward her own country and Richard with her, and the old king takes the road south into the high cold country of the Limousin, to a great gathering at Limoges in February of 1173, where half the princes of the south are summoned to watch the house of Anjou glitter. The Count of Toulouse himself comes to kneel and do homage, an old proud enemy finally bending, and there is a marriage to seal. Little John, 6 years old, to be betrothed to the daughter of the Count of Maurienne, whose lands hold the passes of the Alps. The Count of Maurienne reasonably asks what the boy John will actually hold in his own right, and the old king in front of the assembled south answers, John shall have 3 castles, Chinon, Loudun, Mirebeau, Anjou's heart castles, the bones of the eldest son's own inheritance to be, pledged away to the baby of the family without so much as a word in the eldest's ear beforehand. That is how the chronicles frame what followed, and what followed is on every page of every one of them. The young king, crowned and landless, 18 years old now, stands up in Limoges and refuses consent, demands, again and now in public, England or Normandy or Anjou, something, anything real, and his father in public again says no. And the chroniclers add one more thing, the detail that turns the gathering from a quarrel into a fuse. Men were whispering into the young king's ear all that season, the King of France, his father-in-law foremost, and some record that even the Count of Toulouse, fresh from his homage, took the old king aside at Limoges and warned him plainly, "Watch your wife, watch your sons. There is a plot under your table." You were not in the hall at Limoges. The wardrobe train waited in the town below, and you know these scenes the way you'll know everything in this story, from the service side, by which doors slammed, which suppers came back uneaten, which clerks burned their candles past midnight. But Ansel came down from the castle that week with his face shut like a strong-box, and doubled the watch on the silver cart without explaining, and you didn't ask. Pack fast, tie twice, say nothing. 5 nights later, you find out what he already suspected. The court leaves Limoges riding north, and the order of the march tells its own story to anyone who can read a column, and by now you can. The old king keeps the young king beside him, not behind, not ahead, beside. The way you lead a horse you don't trust at gates. Father and crowned son ride knee to knee up the cold roads of the Limousin, through Poitou, back down the Vienne toward Chinon, making good time, making terrible weather, because the household reads the king's face at every halt, and passes the reading back down the line with the bread, black, black as December. Say nothing to anybody. They come under Chignon's towers in the first days of March, 1173, and the household breathes out. Home rock, treasury walls, whatever is rotten in the family's at least all in one strong place, and a boy can sleep. You wake because Perron's elbow is in your ribs, and his whisper has fear in it. What? Listen. The undercroft is black, rats somewhere, river wind, and then it comes again, the thing that woke him, a horn, not in the castle, below, in the town, down by the bridge gate. One note, long and flat, held until the breath behind it dies. The king rides now, except it is the dead middle of the night, and no horn should sound, and the note is wrong in a way you feel in your stomach before you can name it. Too thin. Not the king's grave horn blower with his chest like a barrel. A young man's blowing. A signal made by someone in a hurry, for someone waiting. Ansel's words from a year ago stand up in your head as if he'd shouted them. One day you'll hear a horn at an hour when no horn should sound. Don't ask questions. Count your loads and watch me. You're moving before Perrin stops swearing. Bare feet on stone, hazel stick in your fist, down the undercroft between the dark ranked chests, thumb finding notches, feast plate sealed, robes sealed, silver sealed, and Ansel's man asleep. No, not asleep, awake and standing. And Ansel himself is already in the doorway with a horn lantern, dressed, as if he'd gone to bed expecting this, which you will realise later is exactly what he had done every night since Limoges. Count, is all he says. All present, you say, and your voice only shakes a little. Then it's not thieving. He looks up through the vault roof, toward the towers where the great ones sleep, and for the only time in your service you watch Ansel hesitate, torn between his creed and something bigger, and his creed loses. He says quietly to the dark rather than to you, somebody's leaving us. By morning the whole rock knows, and by the end of the week the whole world. In the night, the chronicles fix it to the 5th of March going over into the 6th. The young king rose from his bed in his father's own castle of Chinon, slipped his father's household, got horses, crossed the river, and was gone north before the alarm could saddle a single pursuer. Gone to his father-in-law, gone to the King of France. The old king comes down the stair at grey dawn already booted, and you see his face at 30 paces as he crosses the yard, and you would rather not have seen it. It is not the famous rage. That will come, and men who witness the Angevin rage that spring will write it down with awe, The flung caps, the chewed rushes, the words that scorch clerks' ears. This, at dawn in the yard, is worse. It is the face of a man doing sums. He is the finest sum-doer in Europe, and every column he adds says the same thing. This was planned, and planned by people who knew his castles, his roads, his habits, his horns, planned from inside the family. The pursuit is pure Angevin. The king rides after his son at the speed that made him a legend, wearing out horses, and for a day the household genuinely believes he'll do it. Snatch the boy back off the road like a hawk taking a duck. But the son has his father's blood and fresher horses staged ahead of him, and the border of France is close, and the chronicles are brief and final. He got over. By mid-March, the young King of England is in Paris, seated at the right hand of King Louis, who is calling him, savour this because all Europe did, the true King of England now. When the old king's envoys arrive demanding his son home, Louis asks them silkily who sends this message. The King of England, they say. Nonsense, says Louis. The King of England is here beside me. The old king across the sea is a king retired. The world merely hasn't told him yet. And then the second blow, and the third. From the quarter, the old king never armoured. Richard, 15, and Geoffrey, 14, leave their mother's court at Poitiers and ride north, and they do not ride to their father. They arrive in Paris and kneel to Louis beside their brother. And every chronicle that touches these weeks, whatever else it disputes, agrees on the hand behind them, their mother. Eleanor, Queen of England, has set her own sons against her own husband. Even in an age that expected wickedness the way it expected weather, this stopped men's breath. Sons had risen against fathers since Absalom. But Queen, a wife, arming the rebellion from her own court, the chroniclers reached for the end of the world. One wrote that it was against nature itself. Preachers dragged scripture for precedence and came back empty-handed. You hear all of it the way the baggage hears everything, in pieces at fires from riders, mixed half and half with lies. What you see with your own eyes is simpler and, in its way, bigger. You see the household change state, the way water changes when it finally boils. The court had always moved fast. Now it moves like something hunted and hunting at once. The wardrobe sheds weight. Feast plate, hangings, everything ceremonial goes into deep store behind Chinon's 3 gates, and your tally stick loses half its notches in a single day, cut down to a war train, coin, weapons, plain robes, the chapel casket. Ansel trims 19 loads to 11. The kitchen carts fill with hard bread and salt meat. And down the roads from the north come the hired men, the Brabançons, mercenary spearmen in their thousands, hard-faced men from the Low Countries who fight for pay and are feared by everyone, including their employer, because that spring the old king empties his treasuries to buy himself an army that cannot be tempted by a golden young king, only by silver. Silver he has. Chinon's vaults alone, men whisper, are keeping 10,000 spears fed. War, when it comes everywhere at once, which is the plan. The young brothers' allies rise on every border of the old king's world in the same season. The King of France and the young king strike at Normandy from the east. The Count of Flanders, who has been promised whole English counties by the boy king's lavish sealed charters, he's signing away his father's kingdom in slices, that 18-year-old, to anyone who'll fight, comes in from the northeast with his Flemings. The King of Scots, promised the whole north country, gathers to come over the border, and half the baronage of England and Normandy and Brittany and Poitou, every magnate with a grudge. And this king has spent 19 years manufacturing grudges. pulling down unlicensed castles, prying old rights out of old hands, rises for the young kings, as men now say, in the plural. The old king's answer is the thing you spend 1,173 living inside. He does not despair. You honestly cannot tell if he knows how. He becomes pure motion. Normandy, Maine, Anjou, back. The war train covers ground that summer that you would not believe if your own feet hadn't paid for it. 20 and 25 and 30 miles a day for days together. The Brabançons marching in their dust cloud. The king appearing under this threatened wall, and that one like something conjured, until his enemies begin to say the thing they always end by saying about him, with fear replacing scorn. He does not fly. He is everywhere at once. In August, at the ford of a little river you never learn the name of, a girth parts on the lead sumpter, not your train's leather, a chamber horse, badly kept by a boy who has since vanished into the tail, and a locked coffer goes into the water. Not silver, worse, the chanceries, sealed letters and rolls. You are nearest. You're in the river to your chest before anyone orders you. Boots on stones you can't see, the current shoving like a drunk crowd, and you get your shoulder under the coffer and hold it on the ford's edge until men with ropes reach you. Afterward, dripping on the bank while a clerk practically weeps over the dry enough parchments, you take the parted girth in your hands and read it with your fingers the way Ralph taught you. Pale, dry, cracked either side of the buckle. Announced for weeks. Nobody listened. That evening Ansel inspects every strap of leather on all 11 loads by firelight, and he makes you do the reading aloud, strap by strap, and where you call one weak he has you cut and weave the rawhide splice while he watches. He says nothing until the last one. Then the great ones are breaking the world because nobody checked their leather for 20 years. He tests your splice across his knee, hard, and grunts. Buckles hold, or kingdoms fall. Same law up there as down here. Theirs just costs more. That is also the summer you learn what the war does to the court's tail, because the tail swells in wartime like a tick. Where an army goes, the dice players and the drink sellers and the women follow, and pay silver flows through camp like blood through a leech. You see boys your age from the Marshalsea gamble a season's wages across a drumhead in an hour. There's a drink in the camps that summer, raw spirit of wine the sutlers bring in little casks. Burned wine sold by the thimble, and you watch it hollow men out. Watch a carter you know, a decent man with children in Rouen, drink his whole autumn in 3 weeks, and then be flogged for selling a wheel off his own cart. Perrin drifts toward those fires more evenings than you like. Perrin has discovered that the young king's name works on him like the burned wine works on the carter. The glamour of the rebellion, the golden boy who gives horses away, the songs, because there are songs already in the camps of both sides, and the best ones are about the son, not the father. He'd have taken me for the falcons, Perrin says one night, coming back to the cart smelling of the sutler's casks, eyes bright. His man told me, the young king never forgets a friend. His man is recruiting stable boys in his enemy's camp, you say. Think, Perrin. Why would he want the wardrobe's boys? Perrin doesn't answer. You lie awake a long time that night, listening to the Brabançons singing in their own tongue away in the dark, with your hand over the little stitched lump of scarlet inside your tunic, and you understand something about the war that no chronicle bothers to write down. It runs straight through the middle of people, through the kingdom, through the family at the top, and all the way down, through the baggage train, through a straw bed shared by 2 boys under a cart. The young king is beautiful and generous and wronged, and boys dream toward him like moths. The old king is grim and grasping and right, or right enough, and yours. Every soul in the household is quietly conducting the same trial, at every fire, every night. Say nothing, Ansel's creed says. That summer you finally understand it isn't servility. It's survival, and it is very hard. The war itself, that first year, you experience the way baggage experiences war, as rumour, smoke on horizons, and sums. So let me give it to you the way it reached you, dispatch by dispatch, because every item of this is chronicle fact, and each one landed in the household like a stone in a pond. July 1173. The Count of Flanders and the Count of Boulogne, his brother, invade Normandy from the east and take the border fortress of Aumale. Then, at the siege of Drincourt, the Count of Boulogne takes a crossbow bolt and dies of it, and the Count of Flanders, gutted by his brother's death, packs up his whole invasion and goes home for the season. In the wardrobe train you hear grown men murmur that God has fired the first shot and note which side he hit. The same high summer, King Louis himself besieges Verneuil on Normandy's southern border. The old king comes down on him with the Brabançons at that impossible Angevin speed, and Louis, rather than face him, burns the town he'd sworn to protect and retreats into France. Men who were there say the old king stood in the ashes and laughed, and the laugh was not a pleasant one. August into September, the Bretons rise for the young kings, and the old king's mercenaries break them in the field at Dole, and the chief rebels are scooped up in one hall. Dozens of knights, the Earl of Chester himself among them, locked note it into the old king's fortresses. The ledgers of this war are beginning to show a pattern, and the household reads ledgers very well. The father is winning every exchange, and the sons have not won one. But it is the English news in the autumn that teaches you what kind of year you're actually living in. The Earl of Leicester, mightiest rebel in England, holding his great town and castle in the Midlands against the king, crosses from Flanders with an army of hired Flemish weavers, turned spearmen, and lands in East Anglia, aiming to cut the kingdom's heart out while the king is pinned in Normandy. And at a marsh crossing called Fornham, near Bury St Edmunds, on the 17th of October 1173, the king's justiciar and the loyal earls meet him with a fraction of his numbers and annihilate him. Not defeat, annihilate. The chroniclers write that the Flemings were harvested like their own flax, that peasants waded in with scythes and flails to finish what the knights began, that the marsh took more men than the sword did. The Earl of Leicester is taken alive and his countess with him. The story runs through every fire in the household that she flung her rings into the river before they seized her. Another great rebel name into another royal cell. And then, as the roads harden with the first frosts, comes the news that is not like the other news. The news nobody jokes about. The Queen is taken. It arrives the way the biggest things always arrive in this household. Sideways, at night, by a mud-caked rider, and then silence spreading out from the clerk's fire like rings in water. Through that autumn, with her son's rebellion faltering and her own Poitou filling with her husband's men, Eleanor left Poitiers and rode for the safety of the French court as her sons had before her. She did not make it. Somewhere on the roads of her own country, the chroniclers keep the exact place decently vague, and so will I. She was intercepted by her husband's knights and arrested. And Gervase, the monk of Canterbury who chronicled these years, sets down the detail that made every listener in Christendom lean forward. The detail men will still be repeating in 850 years. When they took her, the Queen of England was dressed as a man, riding astride. past 50 years old. Duchess of Aquitaine, Queen of France that was, Queen of England that is, in hose and cloak on a man's saddle in the winter dark, running for Paris, caught by her own husband's household knights on her own roads. Around the wardrobe fire, when the word comes, nobody speaks for a long time. It is Mabel who finally says it, without looking up from her needle, in the flat voice she saves for things too large to say any other way. They've put the Queen of England under lock, a pull of thread. Whatever else comes of all this, that's a door been opened that won't shut in my lifetime nor yours. Kings have killed queens' lovers, and kings have buried queens young, but locking one up like plate in a vault to keep. The needle stabs, that's new, children. Pray you're not alive at the end of that story. You will be, as it happens, almost exactly. The Queen will pass into confinement this winter, and stay confined, comfortable, guarded, moved from castle to castle, for 16 years, until the old king is dead. Every Christmas of your life to come, she will be somewhere behind a wall, and the whole world will know it, and the whole world will get used to it, which may be the strangest sentence in this whole story. You see her once. This is the last week of your 2-year story that has her in it, so look carefully. It is early in the new year, 1174 at Chinon. The war train wintering on the home rock, the fighting frozen down to raids and colds, and a closed party comes in over the bridge at dusk. 20 spears, 2 ladies, and between them a figure in a great plain travelling cloak, hooded, riding a quiet palfrey. No banner, no trumpet. The yard is cleared of everyone who can be cleared, but the wardrobe is unloading fodder by the stable arch, and there is nowhere to send you, so you stand against the wall with your arms full of hay, invisible, and the party passes you at 8 feet. The hood turns just slightly as she passes, taking in the yard, the walls, the towers of the castle where she kept last Christmas with her family around her, taking stock. You see perhaps a third of a face in the dusk, a line of cheekbone, a firm mouth, an eye that has finished being surprised by anything, perfectly calm, calmer than the guards, whose business is pretending this is an ordinary escort and who are all failing, because there is not a man in the yard who does not know exactly what he's looking at. The greatest heiress of the age, the mother of kings, entering her husband's fortress as his prisoner. I promised you at the start, no invented scenes behind the Great One's doors. What Eleanor thought that evening, no one recorded and no one knows. I can only tell you what the boy against the wall could see, and what he could see was this, that of everyone in that yard, in that whole rebellion, in that whole family, the prisoner was the one who looked least defeated. The palfrey's hooves ring under the gate arch, and the dark takes her, and that is all. In the spring they will ship her to England, and we will cross the sea in her wake. That winter is the strangest season of your service. A truce holds, roughly, from the autumn. Envoys shuttle. There was even a parley in the autumn between the old king and his sons on the Norman border at Gisors, where the father, the chroniclers say, offered them money, castles, half his revenues, everything but the power itself, and the sons, with Louis at their elbow, refused it all. So the family war simply pauses, like weather, with everyone knowing the spring will bring it back bigger. The household mends. You mend, literally. Mabel teaches you and Perrin proper saddlers stitching through the dark evenings. 2 boys and a widow bent over harness by rushlight while she talks about Kent, and her boy in the northern garrison, from whom no letter has come since summer, and her hand goes to the little cross, and you and Perrin have learned to keep the needle moving and let her talk. Perrin has stopped going to the sutlers' fires. Something happened at the turn of the year that he won't discuss. The young king's recruiter, the smiling man who never forgot a friend, turned out, when Ansel's quiet word to the marshals finally landed, to be gathering more than stable boys. He was counting carts, counting spears, counting the silver train's guards, and he left Chignon's town one night just ahead of a rope. Perrin, who had told him God knows what across those fires, spent a week the colour of whey, waiting for a summons that never came. Whether it never came because the man was gone, or because Ansel said a word in another ear too, you never learn, and Ansel's face on the subject is a locked chest. But since that week, Perrin does his talking to the falcons in the mews, and does it with the mews master's leave, and he is getting good, and the fear has burned something older out of him. He is going to be all right, your Perrin, though neither of you would say such a soft thing aloud. On the worst night of that winter, sleet flaying the rock, the Vienne running loud and brown, Gilbert of the kitchen finds the two of you hauling wood, and pulls you in by the bread ovens, where it is warm as June, and feeds you bean pottage with actual pork in it, and delivers, unasked, over your bent heads the state of the world according to the kitchen. King's wars, he says, are kitchen matters. Nobody sees it because everybody's watching the banners. The French king can't keep an army fed past 6 weeks. Watch. Every siege he sets, he'll raise the moment the bread runs. Our man can feed spears all year round out of vaults like this rocks, which is why, mark me, our man wins slow and can't lose fast. He refills your bowls without being asked, which from Gilbert is a sacrament. And the young lords, God love them, think war is the tournament with sharper points. Boys, its carts is war. He points his ladle at you like a bishop conferring orders. You two know more of war this winter than the flower of French chivalry. Eat. You eat. Outside, the sleet rattles like thrown gravel, and somewhere north beyond all that darkness the King of Scots is counting the days of the truce, and in Paris the suns are pledging away slices of England for spring soldiers, and in a warm room somewhere above you the old king is doing what he does in the long evenings. The clerks swear this is true, and I believe them, reading. He is that rarest of beasts, a lettered king. Men say he has Latin enough to argue with his own lawyers, and that in the middle of the collapse of his world he will still stop everything to dispute a fine point or hear a book read. His whole family in arms against him, his queen in his cellars, half his baronage forsworn, and the lamp burning past midnight over a page. The truce dies with the frost. In the spring of 1174 the whole thing comes back as promised, bigger, and this time the storm's centre is England, and the household is going there, and so are you, and so is the strangest week of the whole Middle Ages. Hold on to something. We're going to see. The spring and early summer of 1174 arrive like a roof falling in slow motion. In the north of England, the King of Scots, William, a big, brave, unlucky man whom the whole age calls the Lion, comes over the border in earnest, burning through Northumberland, sitting down before castle after castle. Flemish mercenaries land in the east to reinforce the English rebels. The Midlands rising flickers back to life around Leicester, and the man holding England for its absent king, the Justiciar Richard de Lucy, a grey, unglamorous, utterly faithful administrator whose name deserves better remembering than it got, sends across the sea letter after letter with the same message rising through the courtesies like water through floorboards. Come home. England holds, but England is held by fewer hands than you think. Come home, Lord King, or come to a changed address. And the old king, this is the part men argued about in every hall in Europe that summer, does not go, not yet. Through May, through June, he stays on the continent because Normandy is aflame too, and he will not leave a fire at his back. And all the while the French muster grows on the Norman border, and the word hardens into certainty. The moment the old king crosses to England, Louis and the young king will throw everything at Rouen, Normandy's head and heart. That is the trap in its final form. 2 fires, 1 bucket. Whichever he saves, he loses the other. That is the plan, and it is a good plan, and the whole world settles in to watch it work. What breaks the deadlock in the end is a piece of news from England that the chroniclers pass along almost with embarrassment. The rebels and the Scots are gaining so fast that the loyal towns have begun to treat. When that dispatch reaches the king, the household story, told for years after, is that he read it standing, in the road, with his foot already in the stirrup for somewhere else. The sums in that formidable head finally tip. England first. Normandy must hold itself for 1 month on stone and loyalty. The court turns for the coast like a compass needle finding north. What follows you will remember in your bones' own weather for the rest of your life. The war train covers the ground to the Norman coast in a rush that kills 2 oxen and sends 1 whole cart, wheels up, into a ditch short of Barfleur. You count loads at every halt now without being told, hazel stick worn shiny, and it is your count, called out to Ansel through the rain, that catches the missing sumpter at the Touquet crossing before its load of chancery rolls could vanish into the dark. Small thing, notch on a stick. Ansel says nothing, but the next morning you find your bread ration doubled, and old Ralph walking beside you remarks to the horizon that some boys might make drovers one day if they live, which from Ralph is a coronation. Barfleur, when you reach it in the first days of July, is a war port at full boil. The famous harbour of the Norman kings, the stone jetties their dukes and kings have shuttled through for 100 years, and from which, 54 years ago, the white ship sailed at night full of drunken royalty, and sank on the rock outside the harbour mouth, drowning the old king's uncle's only son, and handing England 20 years of civil war. Every soul in this household knows that story. Every sailor in this port can point to the rock. Remember it as you watch the loading. In this family's memory, the sea between Normandy and England is not a road. It is a mouth. 40 ships, the clerks reckon, or near it, for the household, the treasure, the horses, the Brabançon corps, and the prisoners. Because the prisoners are coming too. That is the detail that stops the port in its tracks. The king is taking his rebellion's trophies to England with him. The captured earls and barons, the Earl of Leicester's proud countess, the young Queen Margaret, the young king's wife, and the Queen. Eleanor herself brought up from the Loire under guard to be lodged in England where no French raid can ever pry her loose. You see her go aboard at a distance, that same plain-cloaked, straight-backed figure between spears, and the whole quay somehow contrived to be looking elsewhere. Hundreds of men studying ropes and gulls and their own boots, out of something that is not quite respect and not quite shame and has no name, you know. The wardrobe's loads go into the ship's bellies and you go into the work of lashing them. And here old Ralph takes personal charge, because sea lashing is its own science, and he is its last living doctor, or says so. Chests blocked so they cannot shift, ropes crossed so they tighten against each other, every knot a kind he can tie blind. You work beside him all the last day and twice your fingers, running a strap the way he taught you a year and a half ago, find the pale, dry whisper of leather about to lie, and you cut and splice, rawhide back-woven tight under load, while Ralph watches with his arms folded and his face carefully blank, which is his version of applause. Simon of the Chapel comes to you on the quay that evening, whiter than usual, with the iron-bound casket in his arms, and a request that is really a confession. He cannot swim. He has never been to sea. He was sick crossing the Seine ferry, and the casket is his charge. And if he disgraces, will you stand with him aboard and keep your hands free for the box? You look at this earnest, seasick in advance young man asking a wardrobe boy to buttress the relics of the royal chapel, and you say yes, of course, and then, because his hands are shaking and the casket's carrying loop is chafed, where his grip has worried it for a year, you do something on instinct that you will think about later. You take out your scrap of scarlet, Mabel's scrap, the king's own robe cloth, and you bind it tight around the worn loop, a soft, strong grip for wet hands. Simon stares. That cloth is worth more than his year's stipend. It's doing work now, you say, which is a thing Ansel says, and Simon laughs for the first time in days, and something in you settles. That's the second appearance of the Scarlet. One more coming. They sail on the 7th of July. And the sea, which has been glass calm all week, turns. It comes up out of the southwest in the afternoon, a wind with weight behind it, and by the time the fleet is committed to the crossing, the channel is running grey-green hills with smoking tops, and the ships are climbing them like tired horses. You are in the third ship with the wardrobe loads, wedged between a Cleet and Simon, who has passed through seasickness into a kind of praying trance. Both of you soak to the skin the moment the first sea came over the bow, and never dry again. The noise is the thing no one warns you about. The hull works in a seaway, every timber groaning against its neighbour, and the sound below decks is a cathedral full of doors being tortured. In the hold, one lashing parts with a crack like a whip, a rope, not your leather, and a chest of plate goes walking. 200 weight of iron-bound oak sliding across the planking at each roll like a bull looking for someone to kill, and it is you and Ralph who go down into that dark after it, timing the rolls, and it is your rawhide spliced strap cut free and re-rigged that finally chokes it back against its blocks. Ralph, braced beside you in the wet dark, grips your shoulder once hard, fingers like tree roots. Neither of you says anything. There is nothing to say and no breath to say it with, and in the middle of that same evil crossing, in the king's own ship somewhere ahead, occurs one of the most famous small scenes of the whole reign, recorded, sworn to, retold all that year, the household in terror, the sea worsening, and the old king standing up against the mast and praying aloud before them all, a prayer that is really a wager laid before God. Or, if my coming to England will bring peace, the chroniclers report him saying, then let me arrive safe. And if not, if I am only carrying the kingdom more sorrow, then let this sea take me now. Think about that prayer for a moment in the dark, while the boy who is carrying you through this story bails with the leather bucket in another ship. It is perhaps the only recorded instant in 19 years of reign when this king, this planner, this counter, this man who trusts nothing he cannot audit, publicly puts the whole sum on the table and lets heaven do the arithmetic. His son is anointed and adored. His wife is in his hold. His friend is dead on a cathedral floor and wearing a halo for it. Every ledger he keeps has stopped balancing. And here, finally, at the mast in the spray, is a man asking the auditor of all things whether he is still worth carrying. The fleet runs before the storm all night, and on the morning of the 8th of July, 1174, strung out and salt white and lighter by some horses, it makes England, Southampton water opening its arms, gulls screaming welcome, the smell of land rolling out over the sea like warm bread. Simon, cracked lips moving, finishes his 1000th prayer, and then is neatly, conclusively sick over the rail, into the harbour, with the casket dry in his arms and your scarlet binding dark with salt under his fingers. England. Your England. You've not stood on it in over 2 years. Somewhere north of these downs your mother is alive or she is not. Letters do not happen to families like yours. The kingdom you're standing on is invaded at one end, rebellious in the middle and terrified everywhere, and its king coming off his ship onto the quay does not call for horses to ride at the Scots or at Leicester, or at any rebel in arms. He gives an order that goes through the household and then through England like a bell-stroke through cold air. He's going to Canterbury. Understand what the household understands, standing on that quay with the salt drying stiff in your clothes. This is not a detour. This is the war. Fought on ground no one expected. The inside of the king's own soul in public on a schedule. Every man in England believes, in some room of his mind, that this rebellion is St. Thomas's doing. The murdered archbishop calling in his debt. The dead man exactly 1 horse length behind, keeping up. The king has heard it said for 4 years. Now with his kingdom cracking, he is going to answer it. Not with the donation, not with a charter, but with the oldest coin the age recognises. The court covers the miles to Canterbury in 3 days, and on the morning of the 12th of July, 1174, it stops at the church of St. Dunstan outside the western gate. And there the King of England takes off his shoes. You are there. The wardrobe is there because the wardrobe is always there. Someone must carry what a king removes. And so you stand at the edge of the little churchyard, holding, folded across your 2 arms, the riding cloak of the ruler of an empire, while its owner strips to a plain woolen shirt with a pilgrim's rough cloak thrown over, and steps out barefoot onto the road into Canterbury. The whole city has come out. The road is walled with faces, townsfolk, pilgrims, monks, children on shoulders, the sick carried out on their pallets to watch, and the sound they make is the strangest crowd sound you will ever hear. Not cheering, not wailing, a kind of vast murmured breathing, thousands of people saying nothing loudly. The streets of Canterbury are streets, stones, gravel, the ordinary filth of a market town in July, sun hot underfoot. Within 100 paces the footprints the king leaves behind him show blood in the dust. The chroniclers all record it. They were watching his feet like you were. He does not slow down. Of course he does not slow down. In 19 years no one has ever seen this man slow down, and he is not going to begin for his own pain in front of his own people. Through the gate, through the streets, you follow at the tail of the procession with the folded cloak clutched to your chest like a child, packed in the sweating crowd, and the great cathedral comes up over the roofs ahead. And even now, even today, some cool corner of your mind does what it always does, and takes the measure of the thing. The long grey bulk of it, the towers, the sheer work tonnage of stone, generations of masons' lives standing on end. The largest made thing you've ever seen, and the King of England is approaching it barefoot at the pace of a man going to work. At the cathedral door he kneels and kisses the threshold. Inside, the crowd pours in behind, and the monks let them, because this penance is for witnessing. Secrecy would refute it. He's led to the place in the north transept by the little door from the cloister, where the swords did their work on the winter afternoon 3.5 years ago. He kneels there and kisses the flagstones. A monk stands by the spot the way monks now always stand by that spot. Then down into the crypt, into candle shadow and cold stone breath, where the tomb is. Plain marble pierced with openings where pilgrims reach in to touch the coffin, ringed day and night with the kneeling sick. The air down there is a thing you will never forget. Hot wax, cold stone, incense, and underneath it the smell of massed unwell humanity, hope and pus and lamp smoke all together. The smell, you think, of the whole Middle Ages praying. And there, at the tomb of Thomas Becket, his chancellor, his companion of the hunt and the joke and the shared dish, his enemy, his saint, the King of England puts off the pilgrim's cloak, bares his back, and is beaten. The bishops and abbots present each lay on strokes with a rod. Then the monks of the cathedral, and there are, the record says, some 80 of them, each in turn. The chroniclers differ on the count per man, as eyewitnesses always differ, and I'll not pretend a number the sources won't stand behind. What none of them differs on is the fact, the public fact witnessed by hundreds. The anointed King of England kneeling with his head against a saint's tomb, whipped by monks, stroke after stroke after stroke in front of anyone who cared to look. You look. From the back of the crypt, over shoulders, between candles, you're perhaps 40 feet away, with his cloak in your arms. You cannot see much. The kneeling shape, the white of the shirt pulled down, the slow rhythmic movement of the rods like men threshing. What you can hear is the silence. Hundreds of people in a stone room underground and no sound but shuffling feet, weeping somewhere, and the flat, soft impact of wood on flesh, over and over, patient as rain. However you die, however long you live, you will never again hear anything like the sound of that room. And here is the thing you understand in that crypt. 18 years old now, with your arms full of wool, the thing the clever men writing their chronicles took years to circle around to. This is not humiliation, or not only. This is the counterattack. Every stroke is being watched by England, and every watcher is being converted from a man who whispers the saint fights for the rebels into a man who has seen the saint and the king make peace with his own eyes. The old king is doing the sum he has always done best. What will this cost and what does it buy? And paying in the only currency that can buy back what he lost on this floor, skin, blood, and pride, publicly at the market rate. Gilbert said it in the kitchen a year and a half ago. You can't outride a dead man. The king has stopped riding. He has turned around, walked back, and knelt down, and the whole kingdom is leaning in to see what the dead man does. The king stays in the crypt all that night. This part every source confirms. He keeps vigil at the tomb until morning, fasting on the bare stone in his shirt with his fresh stripes stiffening. No cushion, no fire, no food, and sleepless against the pillar of habit, no sitting. Men who kept that vigil at the crypt's edge say he prayed the night through, kneeling or standing on stone that summer never warms. You wait the night in the cathedral precinct with the household, dozing against a buttress under the Julie stars, waking each time the bells mark an hour, and each time thinking he is still down there. The hardest riding man in Christendom, still as a tomb figure at last, one whole night, holding his own soul to the grindstone. In the morning he hears Mass, drinks water from the martyr's well, is given the pilgrim's blessing, and rides, carried, at first, men say, because the feet will not bear boots, out of Canterbury toward London. He has spent 1 coin short of everything at the shrine, leaving gifts and promises of gifts, rich ones, recorded ones, but the household ledger keepers, and you among the baggage, know the truer accounting. He came to Canterbury with a rebellion, a ruined back accepted, and left with nothing visibly changed at all. The Scots are still over the border, Leicester's men still hold the Midlands, the French muster still hangs over Rouen. He has made his wager, laid his whole soul on the table like the prayer at the mast. Now England holds its breath to see the cards turned. They turn in 5 days. London, the night of the 17th of July, going over into the 18th. The court is lodged at Westminster. The king has kept his chamber some days, bled by his physicians, the record says, and small wonder, salt-soaked, flogged, vigil worn, and past 40. The palace sleeps the thin, creaking sleep of a war capital. Lights in the clerks' windows, spare horses standing saddled, the river running black under the marsh stars. You are sleeping where the wardrobe's duty boy sleeps on such nights, on a pallet in the outer gallery among chests, close enough to be kicked awake if the chamber wants anything, which is how you come to be one of the few souls alive who can say they were within 3 doors of what happened next, and the poet who set it down within the year, Jordan Fantôme, swears he had it from men who were inside them. Hoofbeats first. One horse, ridden past caution, iron skidding on the yard cobbles, then fists on doors and the watch challenging, and a voice half dead with distance croaking that he rides from Ranulph to Glanville in the north, with tidings for the king that cannot wait for morning. The name means something even to you. Glanville, sheriff, king's man to the bone, holding the Scottish war together with wire and prayer. The gallery wakes around you, chest by chest. A chamberlain goes in, candles are struck. You hear through stone and door oak the poet's scene play out in muffled voices. The king roused, ill-tempered and afraid, demanding to know what fresh ruin needs him at midnight, because by now, understand, every messenger for 2 years has been ruin, and the rider, brought in stinking a 4 days' horse, kneeling, getting it out at last. The King of Scots is taken at Alnwick in the morning mist on the 13th of July, the very morning all England will realise within a day that followed the night of the vigil at Canterbury. While the king's stripes were still fresh, the whole rebellion's northern arm was falling off. The story comes out in pieces through the following days, and it never gets less astonishing. William the Lion warned even, and careless, breakfasting before Alnwick with only his household knights about him, while his army scattered to plunder, a small band of loyal Yorkshire knights, Glanville among the leaders, riding all night through fog so thick they could not see each other's spears, meaning to relieve the castle, blundering instead into the one field in Northumberland that held a king. The Scots king's horse killed under him, pinning him, and the Lion of Scotland handing his sword up out of the wreck of his breakfast. A war that armies could not end in 2 years, ended before dinner by 40 tired men who got lost in the right fog. But that is daylight's news. What you have in the Black Gallery of Westminster is the moment itself, the pause after the messenger stops speaking, a pause you feel through the walls, the whole palace one held breath, and then the king's voice, too big for the hour, cracked wide open, calling for God's blessing on the man who brought the word, calling his household up, and the doors banging back and light spilling down the gallery, over the chests in your face, and grown knights running, in their shirts, shouting it ahead of themselves like boys let out of school. The King of Scots is taken. The King of Scots is taken at Alnwick. And then London finds out. It is the middle of the night, and it does not matter. The abbey's bells begin it, and the city's 100 churches catch it one after another across the dark like fires catching, until the whole black bowl of the town is ringing, every bell in London swinging full shoulder at 3 in the morning, and the streets filling with people in their night clothes, weeping and laughing and asking each other, is it true? Is it true? And above it all you stand at the gallery's end with Perrin beside you, both of you shaking with bells and sleeplessness, watching torchlight flood the yard, because everyone in that yard, from the king to the horseboys, is doing the same arithmetic, and it does not feel like arithmetic. It feels like a verdict. Friday, the king knelt and was beaten and asked the saint whether he was still worth carrying. Saturday, in the fog, 400 miles away, the answer was already riding into the mist. The chroniclers barely have to underline it. The whole age did it for them. St. Thomas has taken the king's side. Heaven has audited the house of Anjou and found for the father, you will grow old and see other great nights. You will never see another where you could stand in one spot and listen to the luck of the whole world turn over ringing. What follows the bells is not more thunder. It is the sound of a storm walking away. And that sound, the long diminishing of it, is the rest of this story. So settle deeper wherever you are, because from here the road runs downhill all the way to sleep. The rebellion in England does not so much end as evaporate. That is truly how the chronicles read. Within days of Alnwick, the rebel garrisons begin sending out men with olive faces and careful words. The king moves through the Midlands at his old speed, but there's almost nothing left to ride at. Huntingdon opens its gates, the Ferrers' strongholds treat for terms, Leicester's leaderless men give over. At Northampton, in the last week of July, the surrenders come in like a tide going out, and among them, under guard, is brought the King of Scots himself, to be delivered to the man whose kingdom he invaded. Carried south, the chroniclers record with a wince you can still feel through the parchment, with his legs bound beneath his horse's belly, like any common prisoner. Kings do not forget such details when they happen to other kings. Neither do the boys watching from the baggage line. Fortune's Wheel is the age's favourite picture, painted on every wall. You have now seen the man at the top of it and the man under it, and they were the same size. In under 3 weeks, the kingdom that was cracking when you landed is simply quiet. And the king turns straight around because the second fire is still burning. On the 8th of August he crosses the sea again. This crossing grey, brisk and blessedly boring, and you spend it asleep on the deck cargo, and rides for Rouen, where the last great throw of the war is under way. The King of France, the young king, the Count of Flanders, the whole Confederate weight, camped before Normandy's capital, with the largest siege army the war has produced, hammering at a city that has been holding them off its bridges for weeks with a courage that got into the songs. And here the war delivers its final lesson in how this king wins, and it is Gilbert's lesson, the kitchen lesson. The relief army comes up the roads with the king at its head, and the Brabançons at his back, and the citizens see his banners on the hill, and the gates open, and the assault Louis has been building simply never happens. There are sallies, skirmishes, a day of hard hedge fighting where the mercenaries maul the French foragers. But the chronicle heart of it is this. The King of France looks at a full-fed, silver-paid, fresh-blooded army standing between him and a city that will not break, considers his own bread wagons, and asks for a parley. By the middle of August, the siege of Rouen is over, the great army burning its engines and walking home, and the war, The whole 2-year empire-wide father against sons war is functionally finished, put out at last like a fire that has run out of both fuel and believers. Peace is made in a meadow. You are there, and of all the grand scenes of your service it is the one your memory will keep gentlest. At Montlouis, between Tours and Amboise, in the soft Loire country where this family's story keeps returning, as if on a string, on the 30th of September, 1174, the old king meets his sons. The young king, 19 now, 2 years of ruinous glory behind him, and nothing whatever to show for it. Richard, 17, who alone of the brothers kept fighting in the south to the bitter last edge of summer until his father came down on him in person, and who came to him, the record says, weeping, and was raised up and given the kiss of peace. Geoffrey, 16, saying, as ever, the least. In the field by the river, with the household standing in a vast circle, pretending not to strain its ears, terms are read that the clerks have already titled, with loyally blandness, the peace between the king and his sons, and the terms are the quietest astonishment of the age. Listen to them, because men expected heads on gates. The sons are pardoned, fully. They do homage. Their father takes them back. The documents use the language of the prodigal, received into the father's bosom. The young king is granted 2 castles in Normandy and a rich yearly allowance in Angevin pounds. Richard, half the revenues of Poitou and 2 residences. Geoffrey, half the revenues of Brittany. Real money, none of it small. The clerks reckon the young king's settlement alone at 15,000 Angevin pounds a year, and not 1 inch of what the war was fought for. No province, no shared rule, no power. The father has beaten the whole of Europe to keep his grip whole, and then priced his son's rebellion at an allowance. Generosity and refusal folded into a single document, which is this man entire. The prisoners of the war are to be freed, the captured castles restored, the whole convulsion officially reclassified as a family misunderstanding. Officially. 2 absences say otherwise, and everyone in the meadow counts them. The King of Scots is not covered by the pardon. His price is settled separately that winter at Falaise, in the castle where he has been lodged, and it is steep as a cliff. By the treaty sealed there in December, William the Lion does homage to the old king for Scotland itself, the whole kingdom, held now of England's crown, with his great castles garrisoned by English soldiers as the bond. Men will argue about that treaty for a lifetime, and a later King of England will sell it back for crusade money. But that is another story, and a boy in the baggage train knows only what everyone knows by Christmas. The Lion went home a vassal, and the Queen is not in the meadow, and the Queen is not in the treaty, and the Queen does not go home at all. For Eleanor there is no clause. While her sons kneel and are kissed, she is in England, behind the walls of Salisbury's high, bare castle, on its windy chalk hill, beginning the first full year of a confinement that will consume 16, kept, the record show, decently. Allowances, attendance, moved now and again from castle to castle, wanting for nothing except everything. Her name simply goes quiet in the rolls. The most talked about woman in Europe becomes, for a decade and a half, a rumour with an allowance, until the day her husband dies and she walks out of those walls and, in her late 60s, takes command of England. That too is another story, and a better ending than anyone in the Montlouis meadow would have wagered on. Hold it for comfort tonight, against everything else. The prisoner you saw pass at dusk under the gate of Chinon outlives them, outschemes them, and dies at 82, free, at her own abbey of Fontevraud, having been queen of 2 kingdoms and mother of 2 kings. When they carved her tomb, they carved her holding a book. One more piece of news reaches the household that autumn, and it is the strangest, and you hear it, fittingly, from Simon, who comes to the wardrobe door with his face working between horror and awe. On the 5th of September, 10 days before the peace, in the middle of the afternoon, Canterbury Cathedral caught fire. Sparks from cottages burning outside the precinct. The monk's own chronicler records, lodged under the lead of the choir roof, and smouldered unseen while the crowds below noticed nothing. By the time flame showed, the great gilded choir, the glory of the church, the roof over everything you saw in July, was past saving. The tomb in the crypt, the saint, the pilgrims, untouched. The choir above, gutted to the walls, the monks wailing in the courtyard, blaspheming, the chronicler admits, against God and his saints in their grief. The household takes it as one more mystery in a year drowning in signs. Make of it what you will, the age certainly did. But here is what actually came of it, and I tell you because it is the kind of ending this story owes you. The monks called in the finest builders in Europe, and out of that burned shell over the next decades rose a new choir in the new pointed style from France, soaring, ribbed, full of light, one of the first great Gothic works on English soil, built as a jewel house for the very shrine the king knelt at. The fire that looked like judgment turned out to be scaffolding. The catastrophe was the foundation. If this whole terrible, magnificent family has a moral, it might be that one, so keep it under your pillow. Sometimes the roof has to burn before the light gets in. The court turns south with the shortening days, back through Maine and Anjou, unhurried for the first time in your service. 20 miles a day becomes 12, becomes 8. The Brabançons are paid off in long clinking files and march away east looking for other people's wars. The wardrobe train swells back from 11 warloads toward its old fat 19, feast plate and hangings coming up out of Chinon's vaults, smelling of cedar and dark. Your tally stick fills with notches again, and you cut them now with a certain ownership because somewhere in the last 2 years, without any ceremony, the stick stopped being a thing Ansel lent you and became a thing that is yours. The Christmas court of 1174 is held at Argentan in Normandy. The record has it so, and the peace holds, and the family gathers again under one roof. The old king and his pardoned sons, and the empty chair where nobody puts a chair. The hall blazes. You carry the candles in. The leopards breathe on the walls. From your station by the door you watch the young king laugh at his father's table, and watch his father watch him, and you have learned enough now to know that what you are seeing is not an ending. The chronicles will bear you out in time. This piece is a bandage, not a healing. The brood will tear at itself again and again down the years, and the story of this family runs on through decades of gold and wreckage to break, at last, every heart in it. But that is beyond your story, and beyond tonight, and the truth is that a bandage is not nothing. A bandage is what lets the body sleep while it mends. This winter, in this hall, the war is over, the sea is crossed, the harvest is in, the roads are quiet, and supper is hot. Take the bandage. Everyone in the hall is taking it. That winter at Argentan is the stillest season you've ever known in the king's service, and its small events are the ones your memory will keep when the great ones have worn smooth. Ansel comes to find you on the feast of St. Stephen, a year to the day you realise later since Ralph took you up onto Chinon's wall, and he does it in the most Ansel way imaginable. He appears beside you while you're waxing chest hinges, watches long enough to make you nervous, and then says, as if remarking on the weather, "The clerk of the wardrobe has entered you in the role. Groom of the wardrobe from Christmas. 3 halfpence a day and a livery gown at Whitsun." He pauses. "It's your count they trust, boy, not your back. Backs are cheap." And he walks off before you can answer, which spares you both, because your throat has stopped working. Groom of the wardrobe, understand the size of this and understand it honestly. It is nothing. It is the second lowest rung on a ladder whose top you will never see. Dukes will never learn your name. The chroniclers will never write it. And it is also everything, because it is a rung on a roll in ink. Your name in the king's own household record with a wage against it. Your father cannot read, and neither can you. But that winter you get Simon to show you the entry, and you look at the little black marks that mean what for a long time. Somewhere in a hall in Hampshire, a ploughman's 3rd son now exists in writing. That is more than nothing. That is more than most people who ever lived. The livery gown comes at Whitsun as promised. Good grey wool, the first garment of your life that was made new for you, and not worn soft by other bodies first. It is Mabel who fits it, of course, pins in her mouth, turning you by the shoulders like a joint on a spit. And it is Mabel who, without a word, opens her basket and takes out a small folded square you know before you see it. Your scarlet, the king's robe cloth, salt-stained from the crossing, returned to her by Simon for a new binding when the chapel refitted at peacetime, and sews it flat inside the collar of your new gown, hidden against the neck where no sumptuary rule can complain and no eye will ever see. Her needle flickers. She doesn't look up. Cloth remembers, she sees around the pins, every soul that wears it, every road it takes. This piece has been on a king's back and a boy's, through a war and a storm and a whipping, and now it'll ride under your collar and keep your neck warm till you're grey. She bites the thread and pats the seam flat, and that is Mabel's whole speech, and you would not trade it for a charter of lands. That same winter at last a letter finds her, dictated to a garrison chaplain in the north, 3 sentences 6 months old, and her son is alive. He stood siege in Carlisle when the Scots came and is alive, and Mabel reads the 3 sentences perhaps once a day for the rest of the season, and her hand stops going to the little cross. Not every thread in this story breaks. Hold that too. Perrin gets his muse. The falconers take him on at the Christmas roll, his year of hanging about the muse master having finally outweighed his year of hanging about worse fires, and he moves out from under the carts and up into the loft above the hawks. Where there is, he reports with immense and careful casualness, a real bed, with a curtain. You go and look at the curtain. It is sackcloth on a string, and he shows it the way a bishop shows relics, and you say with equal ceremony that it is a very fine curtain, and neither of you laughs for a full 3 heartbeats, and then neither of you can stop. Old Ralph does not retire because drovers don't, but that winter he begins, with vast unspoken formality, to hand things over. Not duties, secrets. Which farrier in Argentan cold shoes without laming? Which of the oat merchants sells dry? How to read a bridge's timbers from the near bank before you trust a load to it. One grey afternoon he takes you down the sumpter lines, and has you run every girth with your eyes shut, calling each strap sound or false by feel alone, and you call all of them right but one, and that one he lets you argue about until you realise, mid-sentence, that he's grinning his 3-toothed grin. Now you know the last thing, he says. which is that a man can be wrong with his fingers and still be made right by his mouth. You'll go far in a royal household, boy. It is the only joke you ever hear him make about the great world, and he makes it standing in the falling snow, steaming like an old horse, indestructible. He will outlast your service, Ralph. You will choose to believe he outlasts everything, and you keep your hazel stick, but at winter's end you cut a second one. New hazel, straight and green, smoothed with your own knife through the quiet evenings. Because at the spring muster, the wardrobe takes on a new boy, 11 years old, from a manor near Bayeux, with his mother's bread still in his bundle and his eyes like a hare's. On his first morning you put the new stick in his hands and show him the notches, one for every load, thumb on each as it passes, and you hear your own voice say, "Pack fast, tie twice, say nothing," and from the far side of the cart line you feel Ansel hear it too and not turn around, and you understand that this is how the household actually continues, not by rolls and wages, but by this, hand to hand, stick to stick, creed to creed, downward through boys, forever. Spring comes up the valleys of Normandy the way it always does. Ditch water first, then blackthorn, then the whole green shout of it. In May of 1175, the old king and the young king crossed to England together sharing a ship. The chronicle notes it like a wonder, and the court resumes its eternal motion. Winchester, Westminster, Woodstock, the roads unrolling, the horns sounding their three calls, departure and alarm, and the king rides now, and none of it will ever again sound to you the way it did before you knew what a horn in the wrong hour could mean. The kingdom settles, the harvest come in fat that year and the next. The justices ride their circuits, the new laws grind ahead, the treasury refills like a tide pool. If you did not know what you know, if you had not stood in the gallery at Westminster and in the crypt at Canterbury, you could believe, watching this ordered, humming, prosperous machine, that the House of Anjou was at peace with itself. You know better, and knowing better changes nothing about the sweetness of the evenings. That is the last lesson, and the household teaches it to you without words, the way it taught you everything. How to live well inside a story you know will end badly for the great ones. The young king will rise again in the years ahead and die of it, of fever in the south, at 28. Begging by messenger for a forgiveness his father will send with a ring but dare not bring in person. Geoffrey will die young too under tournament hooves in Paris. Richard will fight his father to the very deathbed and take the crown and become the Lionheart, and break his mother's heart last of all. John Lackland will lack land no longer, and England will wish he had. The old king will die at Chinon, on the home rock within a bowshot of where you slept among the chests. Betrayed at the end, the tale runs, by the one son he never armoured his heart against. And from all that wreckage will come, in the fullness of time, charters and parliaments and common law, the deep bones of a world you, listening now, still live in. The mill grinds the finest flour in the world. Ralph told you that on the wall. He never said the mill was kind. But all of that is years away, over the horizon of your story. And tonight, your last night in this story, so let it be a good one. The court lies at a manor in the Vexin in early summer, and the work is done. The loads are counted, the new boy called the tally and called it right. The horses are hayed, the watch is set. Supper was pottage and good bread. English milled, Gilbert operating at last on flour he approves of, and the difference is real. The whole household sleeps better fed, which Gilbert has been saying since before you were born. You have walked the cart line the final time with your thumb on the notches, all present, and now you lie in the sweet dusty hay of a loft with the wardrobe safe below you, and the last red of the long dusk in the gap under the eaves, and Perron's hawks muttering sleepily somewhere across the yard. Listen to the household going down around you, layer by layer, the way you first learned it by smells. The clatter of the kitchen fading pot by pot, the horses easing hip-shot in the lines, a groom singing somewhere half a song, forgetting it, not minding, the watch's slow feet, a last door, and underneath everything that silence you have learned to trust, the specific silence of a great household with nothing wrong in it, which is not the absence of sound but the sum of 1,000 small right sounds, wheels chocked, straps sound, chests locked, everyone breathing where they ought to be. You're warm enough, you are fed enough, you are safe enough. You have a name in a roll, a wage against the name, a scrap of scarlet at your collar, a stick worn smooth with counting, and people, Ansel, Mabel, Ralph, Gilbert, Simon, Perron, one hare-eyed boy from Bayeux who would notice if you were gone. That is more than the Queen of England has tonight on her chalk hill. It is more, maybe, than the King of England has, with his son's smiles to read by candlelight. You would not trade with either of them. You did not understand that when this story began. You understand it now. Wealth is weather too. Enough is the only fortune that holds. Tomorrow there will be horns before dawn, or there will not. Tomorrow the court will move or hold. Tomorrow there will be loads to count, leather to read, a boy to teach, mud, bread, miles. But that's tomorrow. Tomorrow always thinks it's important. Let it wait in the yard till morning. The same hay smell your father's barn had, the same swallows working the last light, the same tiredness in your arms, earned honest, going out of them slow like heat from a stone, the same as last summer, the same as every summer stretching on ahead, down all the roads of a long, small, useful life. Centuries will pass, the court you know will stop moving, kings will settle into capitals like rings into cushions, and the roads will forget the horns. Chinon's walls will stand empty above the Vienne, gold in the evening kept now for wonder instead of war. Canterbury will rise from its fire into light and stone lace, and the steps to the crypt will be worn hollow. You can see them today. By 800 years of feet doing exactly what a barefoot king did in July of 1174. Eleanor will lie at Fontevraud with a book carved open in her hands, patient as leather, and the guides will still lower their voices at her name. And the family itself, the terrible brilliant brood, will shrink at last into stories told in the dark to help strangers sleep. But people will still pack by torchlight for journeys they didn't choose, still guard some scrap of scarlet stitched where nobody sees it, still hand the stick to the new boy and teach him to count what he's trusted with. Some things don't change. The household doesn't change. There is always the great and their thunder overhead, and there is always, underneath, someone tying the loads and saying nothing, and the world rides on their knots, so let it come now. Let sleep take you the way it took a wardrobe boy in a hayloft in the Vexin, 850 years ago, with the day counted and the loads all present. Let the hall fade. Let the horns rest till morning. Let the bells of London swing silent in their dark towers. Let your thoughts slow and soften and finally stop. The watch is set, the straps are sound, the gates are barred, and nothing is missing, and nothing is owed till dawn. You've earned this rest. The Count came out right. Take it, and dream of whatever dreams may come. Good night.